On this episode of Empire Wrestling Look Back, we take a look at one of ECW's most intrusive and reality-blurring storylines. This is the kayfabe story of the lifelong feud of social outcast Raven and the heart and soul of ECW, Tommy Dreamer. So, to start this iconic hardcore feud, we need to take a trip back in time to the original ECW, Eastern Championship Wrestling, a small working-class promotion based out of Philadelphia, New York, founded in 1989. The promotion was originally under the Tri-State Wrestling Alliance banner, until it was sold to Todd Gordon in 1992. Gordon then founded his own promotion from the remnants of the TWA, known as Eastern Championship Wrestling. ECW was officially born. By September of 1993, head booker and wrestler for the ECW, Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert, had falling out with owner Todd Gordon, and was replaced by then 28-year-old businessman Paul Herman. Herman was already known throughout the wrestling business at the time as Paul E. Dangerously, and had just been fired by WCW. He was eager to plant his mark on the East Coast wrestling scene at the time. Heyman made an immediate impact, as throughout 93 and 94, Heyman implemented a more gritty product and began upping the in-ring hardcore style, as well as more non-PG storylines. This governed a reputation of ECW being more extreme and hardcore than the other big players out there at the time, WCW and the WWF. Where Eddie Gilbert focused on bringing ex-WWF stars such as Jimmy Snuka and Terry Funk, Heyman pivoted the promotion towards the future, giving the spotlight to local indie talents such as Shane Douglas, The Sandman, Taz, Sabu, and Tommy Dreamer. By the summer of 94, ECW had transitioned from Eastern to Extreme Championship Wrestling, with Todd Gordon selling the company to Paul Herman in 1995. This finally gave Heyman's wild mind the freedom it needed to make all of the wildest creations come to life, starting with Scot Levy, or as you may know him, Raven. Before becoming ECW's cult icon that we know him as today, Scot Levy wrestled on the US indie scene from 1988 up until his TV debut, wrestling for the WWF in a one-off episode of WWF Primetime, losing to Coco Beware on October 9th, 1990. He wrestled under the name Scott the Body. Levy would return to the indie circuit until 1992, when he signed his first professional contract with WCW. Levy was given the name Scotty Flamingo. It was basically a cheesy embodiment of a Florida surfer bro. Levy himself would later state in several shoot interviews how much he hated the character, and the high-flying persona and style he was forced to portray by WCW management. Levy would find success, however, capturing the WCW light heavyweight title from Brian Pillman at Beach Blast 1992. However, his run with the company would come to an end in February 1993 after disagreements with head booker at the time, Bill Watts, believed to be over the direction of his character. After departing WCW, Levy wrestled for the USWA before signing a full-time contract with the WWF, working as an on-screen manager by the name of Johnny Polo, an upper-class, snobby, nepo baby, preppy douche essentially, appearing on WWF Superstars as Adam Bomb's manager, and in later months managed the Quebecers. Polo also worked as a color commentator and co-host of Radio WWF, even working as an associate producer for Monday Night Raw at one stage. But by October 1994, Levy would part ways with the WWF, as despite wrestling on a handful of occasions, Levy wanted more wrestling time, and to find something more fulfilling outside of the World Wrestling Federation. After leaving the WWF, Levy began focusing more on himself, and began creating his own character, which he referred to as Raven. The inspiration for the name originated from Edgar Allan Poe's poem named, drumroll please, The Raven, as well as Patrick Swayze's manipulative Zen master of crime in the classic crime thriller Point Break. Levy had a picture in his mind of what he wanted Raven to be. He was a bleak, depressive, nihilistic, sociopathic, twisted individual whose life had continuously failed him and let him down at every turn. A man whose past had haunted him and had carried his trauma and channeled his anger up until the present day. He was unpredictable. He was dangerous. Levy dramatically changed his appearance, donning a leather jacket. He installed piercings, long tattered jean shorts, long thick hair that covered his face, combat boots, and a flannel tied around his waist. He bulked up to approximately 235 pounds as well, and began delivering cryptic yet eloquent promos, often with a deep philosophical message, taking inspiration from poems and sonnets. These promos mostly ended in what would become Raven's signature sign-off, "Quoth the Raven nevermore," again inspired by Edgar Allan Poe's Raven poem. Levy would initially take his pitch to Smoky Mountain Wrestling's owner Jim Cornette, who declined the pitch, but Levy was determined to make it a reality, taking the pitch to Heyman's ECW, and the rest, they say, is history. Heyman pounced on the idea, as it was exactly what ECW needed, and fitted the new, gritty and violent mold of ECW that Heyman was shaping in 1995. Heyman knew exactly who he would bring Raven in as foil for: the hardcore babyface, Tommy Dreamer. Raven was introduced to ECW audiences by Stevie Richards. The story itself was already in motion months prior, as Richards was going through somewhat of an identity crisis of sorts in late 1994, after going on a losing streak. Richards would perform under ring names such as Stevie Flamingo, Stevie the Body, and Stevie Polo, all clearly referencing previous ring names and characters portrayed by Scot Levy. After another loss at the hands of Tommy Dreamer, Richards vowed to show Dreamer the real Johnny Polo. Raven would make his first ECW appearance on the January 10th, 1995 edition of ECW Hardcore TV, with Stevie Richards revealing Dreamer was not the good guy the fans thought he was, and that Raven had a vendetta against Dreamer, dating back to their childhood. Raven would go on to form a stable, of which he would be the cult-like leader, flanked by Tony Stetson, Johnny Hotbody, and Stevie Richards, known collectively as Raven's Nest. Raven became a cult-like leader of the group of wrestlers who were consistently losing and looking for guidance. Stetson and Hotbody in particular calling Raven, quote, the voice of their generation. On March 18th, 1995, at Extreme Warfare, Dreamer would lose to all four members of Raven's Nest in a gauntlet match, the start of what would become one of many psychological victories for Raven over Dreamer. When Dreamer first arrived in ECW, he was a smiling, handsome babyface, and the fans couldn't have hated him any more for it. Raven presented a foil to Dreamer, to elevate both men's careers, and Heyman was the man to facilitate it, as Dreamer vs. Raven became the headline story in ECW from 1995 to 1997. On April 8, 1995, at ECW's three-way dance event, Raven would fire Hotbody and Stetson from Raven's Nest, replacing them with the Pitbulls. Later in the show, Raven would expand on his hatred for Dreamer, which had been kept cryptic for months. Raven would explain that he and Dreamer had both attended the same summer camp in their youth, where Raven would become the boyfriend of the bullied, acne-faced, overweight girl Beulah McGillicuddy, who was spurned and rejected by Dreamer. Richards revealed that he had tracked down Beulah, who was now a penthouse model, who also harbored a grudge against Dreamer. Later that night, Raven faced Dreamer in their first singles encounter, with Raven winning thanks to interference from Beulah and Richards. Beulah went on to become Raven's valet at ringside for his matches, as well as his on-screen girlfriend, consistently interfering on Raven's behalf. The storyline of a broken cult-like leader, the babyface with a dark past, and the spiteful teen girlfriend was something not seen at the time, or even today for that matter, in pro wrestling. This was a storyline completely fabricated, yet so real and personal. It blurred the lines, and fans didn't know who was the victim, who was the villain. It was exactly what Scot Levy needed, as much as it was for Tommy Dreamer. Beulah McGillicuddy was brought into ECW by Raven, but was introduced to Raven by Ron Grant in Florida several months prior, with Raven agreeing Beulah could add an extra dimension to the storyline. The feud was then ramped up again at Barbed Wire Hoodies and Chokeslams, an ECW event in June of 1995, where Raven's Nest beat down Dreamer's close friend and ally Luna Vachon before pinning Dreamer down and breaking several of his fingers, in storyline of course. In July of 1995 at Hardcore Heaven, Raven and Richards retained the ECW tag titles against Dreamer and Luna, with Raven once again gaining a physical and psychological battle over Dreamer. The Pitbulls would leave Raven's Nest and were replaced by the Dudley Boys on the same night, which led to Dreamer finally getting a win over Raven in a 6-man tag match, teaming with the Pitbulls to defeat Raven and the Dudleys. Later that evening, Dreamer handcuffed Raven and delivered a chair shot dubbed the Chair Shot Heard Round the World for the shockwaves it sent through ECW, the pro wrestling landscape, and for its sheer brutality. At WrestlePalooza on August 5th, 1995, during an 8-man tag match, Raven, Richards, and the Dudley Brothers, aka Raven's Nest, defeated Dreamer, Cactus Jack, and the Pitbulls, after Cactus Jack, Dreamer's longtime ally, turned on him, joining Raven's Nest. So basically, everyone Dreamer had trusted had turned on him. And on September 16th, 1995, at Gangsta's Paradise, Raven and Richards lost the tag titles to the Pitbulls, following interference from a very irate Tommy Dreamer. Raven and Richards regained the titles from the Pitbulls on October 7th of that year at South Philly Jam, only to losing them to the Public Enemy later that evening. At November to Remember on November 18th, Dreamer and Funk defeated Raven and Cactus Jack in the main event. At the same event, Raven's Nest received a new member, the Blue Meanie, who became a lackey of sorts to Stevie Richards. At December Dismember on December 9th, 1995, Raven once more defeated Dreamer, although later that night, Dreamer, the Pitbulls, and the Public Enemy defeated Raven, Richards, the Eliminators, and the Heavenly Bodies in an Ultimate Jeopardy cage match when Dreamer pinned Richards. At Holiday Hell on December 30th, Raven defeated Dreamer to become the #1 contender for the ECW World Championship, unsuccessfully challenging the incumbent champion, the Sandman, later that evening. At the same event, the Dudley Brothers left Raven's Nest following a confrontation with Richards. During the build-up to the match, Raven further expounded on his grudge against Dreamer, accusing Dreamer of not having been there for him during his parents' divorce, an accusation that Dreamer hotly denied. At House Party of January 5th, 1996, Richards attempted to kiss McGillicuddy, who refused, eventually announcing that she was pregnant. After Raven angrily confronted McGillicuddy, she informed him that he was not the father, causing Raven to attack Richards out of jealousy, believing it was him who had got her pregnant. McGillicuddy then revealed that Tommy Dreamer was in fact the father, with Dreamer storming the ring and beating down Raven, Richards and the Blue Meanie before embracing Beulah. After months of on and off friendship, the relationship between Raven and Richards began to deteriorate in late 1996, because of course Raven found out that it wasn't Richards who got Beulah pregnant, but he still harbored a lot of resentment towards Richards. At Ultimate Jeopardy on October 5th, Raven was scheduled to team with Brian Lee against Dreamer and the Sandman in a match with Raven's ECW World title on the line. After Raven was announced as being unable to compete, Richards substituted in for him, with Raven losing his title after the Sandman pinned Richards. Upon his return, Raven blamed Richards for the loss. And at Holiday Hell on December 7th, Raven defeated the Sandman in a barbed wire match to once again regain his ECW title. Despite this, however, the tension between Raven and Richards continued to build up, and on December 28th, Richards turned on Raven by superkicking him during a match against the Sandman. Richards, the Blue Meanie, and Supernova subsequently broke away from Raven. At the Crossing of the Line event on February 1st of 1997, Raven successfully defended the title against Dr. Death Steve Williams, after interference from Richards had backfired. As part of an agreement between ECW and the WWF, Raven and several other ECW wrestlers appeared on the February 24th edition of 1997's Raw is War, with Raven confronting Stevie Richards. It was at WrestlePalooza on June 6th of 1997 where Raven faced Dreamer in a loser leaves ECW match. During the bout, Raven abandoned his new valet Chastity and unsuccessfully begged Beulah to take him back. Dreamer ultimately won the match by pinning Raven for the first time, marking the end of their lengthy feud at the end of Raven's ECW career. Raven subsequently left ECW with his tail between his legs and rejoined the WCW. Raven had come full circle. Everything he wanted and everything he needed, he had gained and lost in a period of 2 years. Thus, this brings us to the end of the story between Raven and Tommy Dreamer. At least in ECW, that is. If people want to know more about their continued feud throughout their time in the WWF, ECW's reboot, and even in TNA, I can talk about maybe that in another video. But for now, I just want to summarize with what was one of the most bizarre yet intriguing storylines in any promotion that I've ever seen. Raven was dead set on ending Tommy Dreamer's career, and in the ultimate tale of fate, had his own career ended. He brought Beulah in, and he lost Beulah. He won the world title, he lost the world title. And his feud with Tommy Dreamer was the culmination of everything. It consumed his life, it consumed his career, and ultimately, it cost him everything.